Once upon a time, deep within a long-forgotten forest, a king, once proud and strong, now stumbles through the darkness, not knowing which way to turn. Yet though he sees no bright-lit path before him, all is as it should be, and far beyond his mortal grasp, the fine threads of his will and his fate unwind into the long, cold night. Yet there is no night which is not followed by day, and in time the lost king is led into the half-lit dawn, where light and shadow mingle and merge, and a man may not be sure of his senses. And in this misty borderland, which is neither night nor day, the lost king is called upon to shape the future of his clan. By and by, the figure of an old woman with a nodding head takes form in the mist before him and whispers to his thoughts. "My lord," she began as she drew close by, "marry my beautiful dark-haired daughter, and I will show you the morning at the edge of the wood. Refuse my wish, and you shall forever search, yet never find the sunlit morn you crave." Now the king's first wife was dead, and his fear of the misty half-lit dawn was great, and so he agreed to marry the unknown girl. The old woman then led him through the mists to a small cottage where the promised bride sat waiting. Now she was even more beautiful than the king could have dreamed, though when he looked into her eyes, a shudder of dark foreboding rippled like ice through his veins, and he knew without doubt that all was not well. Yet a choice had been made which could not now be undone, and in the distance, far beyond the edge of the half-lit wood, the shrill cry of the morning cockerel announced the newborn day, and in that same instant the old woman and the forest faded from view, and the king, with the dark-haired girl beside him, was returned into his own familiar land. Now the king had 7 young children, 6 sons and a daughter, whom he loved beyond all else. And whilst he kept his word and married the dark-haired girl, he said nothing of the children, and kept them hidden from her icy gaze. And as soon as the wedding feast was over, he visited a wise woman and asked for her help. For a long time she sat, silently considering his request. "Sire," she began at length, "what you ask is great, and far beyond a power such as mine. Your bride is shrewd, shrewd beyond measure, a witch's daughter. Of this there can be no doubt. You are wise, therefore, to keep your children hidden, for if ever she should lay her eyes upon them, you, I sense, will never see them again." And as he listened to the wise woman's words, a great sorrow fell heavy upon his heart, and he rued the day he had met the dark-haired girl. Well, the wise woman then gave him a magic reel of cotton. "Gather your children together, sire, and toss this thread before you. It will lead to a secret castle deep within the forest, and there, for the moment, you may hide your children from your new bride's gaze." Well, later that night, when the queen was sleeping, the king lifted his small children from their beds, and with the help of several trusted servants, they set off speedily into the forest. On and on they walked, tossing the magic thread before them into the night, and eventually, after many long hours had passed, they came to the secret castle which the wise woman had described, and there, praying that his children would be free from harm, he bid them a fond farewell and returned to his sleeping queen's side. Well, for the moment, the children were safe, but the king missed them greatly and went to visit them every day. Very quickly, the dark-haired queen became suspicious, and whilst he was away, she pleaded with the servants to tell her where he went and promise gold to anyone who would speak. Yet all remained loyal to the king and his children and kept the secret safe. Yet their silence merely fueled the queen's suspicion, and whilst the king was away, she would pace the corridors of the castle, wringing her hands and seething with rage. And as each day passed, she became more and more determined to discover his secret, and vowed that she would not rest until she did so. Again and again she pleaded with the servants and increased her bribes of gold, until at last one of the king's men weakened in his resolve and told the new queen everything he knew. Now when the king returned later that day, the dark-haired queen said nothing, though when night fell and he lay sleeping beside her, she rose from their mattress, and taking up the finest silken thread in the land, she began to fashion and weave shirts to clothe the hidden children. And as she worked, she hummed a charm which she had learned at her mother's knee, and wove its secret magic into each silken garment.
This charm holds a mystery unseen to the eye of poor blinded groundlings until born to the sky.
For many long nights she worked in this way, whilst the king lay sleeping and all unknowing beside her. And when at last the silken shirts were complete, she stole the magic cotton and set off into the forest. Now as she drew close to the castle, The 7 children saw her from a window, high up in a turret, where each day they would watch for their father. Yet without waiting for his accustomed call, the 6 young princes, ignoring their sister's pleas for caution, left her alone and rushed excitedly to the courtyard below. Though as they ran toward the dark-haired queen, they soon realized their mistake, and when they looked into her eyes, shudders of dark foreboding rippled like ice through their veins, and each child knew, as their father had before them, that all was far from well. And from high above the ground, the young princess could see the evil which her brothers now faced, and she called out desperately to save them.
"Look away!"
she cried.
"Look away!"
Yet her impassioned cries were lost upon the wind, and in any event she was much too late, for the princes were locked beyond recall in the wicked queen's gaze, who now drew the charmed silken shirts from beneath her cloak, and with wild laughter tossed them into the air, where for a moment they hung, billowing like sails in the breeze. Though as each silken garment tumbled down over their heads, the 6 young princes were utterly overtaken by the charm which she had worked, and instantly they were transformed into 6 white swans. The Dark Queen laughed mercilessly when she saw her magic, and flung her arms into the air.
"Take to the skies!"
she cried, as the 6 changed princes fluttered helplessly before her.
"Take to the skies in swan's white down! No more shall you wear your human crown. 'Tis I alone share your father's throne, whilst you, poor creatures, the wide world roam. Yet you will carry all your days the memory of your princely ways. Though nevermore you shall belong, you'll haunt men's hearts with sweet swan song."
And with these words, the queen dusted her hands, drew her cloak around her, and swiftly left the scene. And in the castle grounds, the once fine princes stood trembling and powerless against her charm, and with tragic resignation they stretched out their great white wings, sped across the courtyard, and gathering the air beneath, were borne into flight. And as they rose into the lonely skies above, the eldest drew his white-winged flock toward the castle turret where the young princess remained. And with his brothers soaring in the still slipstream behind, he circled and spiraled and called out to her in song. With all the grace and knowing of swans, the 6 ill-fated brothers set forth into the distance, and very soon were lost from view. And as the young princess looked on, a great longing overcame her, and she vowed that whatever the cost, she would deliver her brothers from the Dark Queen's charm, and restore them to their rightful princely form. Now the very next day, the young princess set forth from the castle, where she could live in peace no more, and traced on the ground below the path which her brothers had taken. For many days and nights she walked without rest, searching the skies for her lost swan-like kin, and listening for their haunting song. And though the pain of separation was almost more than she could bear, the love which she felt for her brothers sustained her and gave her courage to go on and on. We cannot say how far she walked, for this it is not given to us to tell. Yet we do know that eventually she came to a shimmering blue lake, and there, completely overcome with exhaustion, she lay herself down to sleep. A whole day passed, yet in the evening, as the sun hung low over the water, the young princess was drawn from her slumbers by the soft sounds of rippling water, rustling wings, and the unmistakable song of the 6 swan-like brothers for whom she had searched. Now, with more relief than words could ever tell, the princess ran to the water's edge, where one by one the enchanted creatures stepped from the water into her warm embrace. And as she held them, each in turn to her breast, their charmed feathers fell like melted snowflakes to the ground, and the lost brothers, just as she had known them, were revealed to her once more. Yet alas, the princess's joy was short-lived, for as she listened to her brother's tale, she came to understand the cruel nature of their enchantment. For a quarter of the evening hour, the eldest prince began, as sunlight dims and fades from the skies, only then can we resume our human form and touch once more our human lives. Yet for all eternity outside this time, from all we have known we are torn apart, whilst deep within each snow-white breast still there beats a human heart, and within each long swan's throat a song of memory and yearning long. As he spoke, tears streamed from her eyes, and she begged him to tell her how they might be set free, and vowed to do anything he might ask of her. At this her brothers bowed their heads, each one knowing the enormity of what she asked, though as the brief moments of meeting drew to a close, and the charm once more began to overtake them. The eldest prince raised his head, looked into her eyes, and spoke these parting words. "Sister, if you would fulfill this task, to free your brothers from the dark queen's grasp, for 6 long years from dawn till dusk, in silence you must work for us. Into garlands green weave fresh star flowers, to save our souls from darker powers. And when your flowers into shirts have grown, we shall reclaim our rightful home." And as he spoke, the swan's white down closed in around him, and the princess knew that her brothers must now depart. And with long white necks outstretched, the enchanted creatures called out in farewell, and beating the air into motion with their great white wings, they carried themselves from the shores of the lake, high, high across its waters, far into the distance beyond. Yet though they were soon lost from view, their sweet swan song lingered long in the still air of the late evening sky. And so the long work began. Days turned into weeks, weeks became months, and months stretched out into years. Yet the princess remained faithful to her vow and spoke not a single word. Each morning she would gather fresh starflowers from the forest floor, seat herself high up in the branches of a great oak tree, and there, patiently and silently, she would coil and thread the fragile stems and star-like blooms into skeins like tiny flower garlands. Then, taking each garland in turn, she would cross them, warp and weft together, and as time passed, the fabric for her banished brothers' shirts grew and grew. And in the evening, when her work was done, she would climb from the tree and lay herself down to rest. And in the moments before she drifted into sleep, she would look up at the darkening sky, and sometimes there, amongst the shifting evening clouds, she fancied that she saw her swan-like brothers fly, and heard their plaintive cry. And as she listened, she remembered the life which as children they had shared. How long ago it seemed to her now, as she lay all alone in the forest, beneath the stars and the pale evening moon. When she had begun her work, she had been but a child, yet as the long years unfolded, the child princess had grown into a beautiful maiden. Now it was about this time that a king from a far-off country was passing through the forest and saw her weaving high up in the branches of the oak. Never before had he seen such beauty, and he knew at once that he could take no other for his bride. Yet when he called up to her in greeting, the princess made no reply. He called again, and again, in all the tongues he knew, yet only silence returned his call, and the beautiful princess simply continued with her weaving. Now the king could not go on his way without her, and so he sat down, leaned against the trunk of the great oak in which she sat, and waited. By and by, the princess took a golden circlet from around her neck and threw it down onto the ground beside him. When he did not continue on his way, she took from around her waist a girdle and let it fall onto the green moss beside him. Still the king remained, and the princess resumed once more her weaving work. A whole day passed by, and when still the king did not leave, the beautiful girl took from about her shoulders her fine robe and let it fall softly to the ground below. Throughout all this, she remained faithful to her vow and spoke not a single word. And without need nor want of words, the king lifted her from the branches of the oak, wrapped her in his cloak, and carried her from the forest to his own homeland, where with great joy she accepted his hand in marriage. The king had a wicked stepmother who quickly gathered a throng of bitter crones about her and spoke out against the new queen, who spent her days collecting starflowers and weaving in silence. If the girl will not speak,
she will not speak.
I tell you now.
Now,
she is not fit to be your bride.
Not fit,
nor
fit
mother
to be your
of a
bride.
royal child.
Mother of a royal child.
So mark my words.
And mark them
For
well.
this I vow.
She vows, she vows,
to
she
her
vows.
I shall not bow.
Never, never, never bow.
Yet the king paid no heed to these meddlesome words, and within a year the new queen gave birth to a healthy son. The while she slumbered, with the babe nestled in her arms, the stepmother and her ill-wishing crones crept into the room and stole the babe away. They then went to the king and told him that the queen had killed his firstborn son. Now the king was deeply shocked, but he did not believe their cruel accusations, and he ordered them to hold their tongues. So they bided their time, and sure enough, before the year was through, the queen gave birth to a second healthy son, though just as before, the stepmother and her crones stole the babe away. Once more they told the king that the queen had killed his son, and they called for her punishment, according to the laws of the land. The king was beside himself with grief, and amidst the mounting pressure he implored his queen to speak out in her own defence and put the matter straight. Yet though she also ached with loss, she knew that she could not speak until the 6 years of silence were through, and so, throughout all, she sat weaving her flower garlands without a single word. Though in the evening, when her work was done, she would gaze through her window at the darkening sky, and sometimes there, amongst the shifting evening clouds, she fancied that she saw her swan-like brothers fly, and heard their sweet swan song. And as she listened, she remembered her brothers' parting words. Into garlands green weave fresh starflowers, to save our souls from darker powers. And when your flowers into shirts have grown, we shall reclaim our rightful home. How long ago it seemed. Another year passed, and once more the queen grew big with child, and very soon gave birth to a 3rd healthy son. Yet as soon as the cord was cut, the stepmother and her crones, who had been waiting in the shadows, rushed into the room and snatched the child away. They then went to the king, and before the entire court accused the silent queen of killing the 3 royal princes, and proclaimed her a witch. Now though the king did not believe these accusations, he was bound as king of the land to give his queen over to be tried, and when even then she would not speak, she was condemned to be burnt at the stake, and dressed in a coarse sackcloth robe, she was taken beneath the castle to a dark prison room. There, all alone, in the dim light, she remained ever faithful to her vow, and continued, patiently and silently, to sew her starflower fabric into shirts for her enchanted brothers, who still as swans roamed the skies above. Though as the shirts took final form in her hands, the day of execution also drew close, and when at last time could allow the queen no more, she took the shirts, which save for one left sleeve were now complete, and placed them over her arm. She was then taken from her prison room and led to the courtyard above, where a huge fire had been laid. And there, from a window, the divided king looked on, still believing his silent queen innocent of the crimes for which she stood accused. And though he knew not the reason for her silence, nor the purpose of her weaving work, his love for her was beyond the realm of words, and his faith in her unshaken. Yet in the courtyard below, The hasty crowd jeered and mocked the silent queen, and heckled for her burning. The king could bear to look no more.
Witch, burn the
But
witch.
just then, in the moment before the kindling wood was lit, high in the distance, across the early morning sky, came the strains of the beautiful swan song, which the queen now knew so well. And as she lifted her eyes to the skies above, her 6 swan-like brothers soared into view. And in that same moment, the long, long years of silence reached their close. Soon the air was filled with song, and as the crowd looked on in wonder, the great white birds swooped down into the courtyard and came finally to rest at the young queen's feet. And she, realizing the moment, took from about her arm the 6 starflower shirts, and with great gentleness clothed at last her yearning white-winged flock. And as she did so, their swans' feathers of enchantment fell like melted snowflakes to the ground, and the 6 lost princes, now grown into fine young men, emerged once more in human form. Now after the queen had embraced her brothers, she turned to her king, who had allowed her silence throughout, and free at last to speak, she called to him across the hushed crowd. And coming to her side, he heard the secret of the prince's enchantment and of his wicked stepmother's deeds, which until this moment his patient queen had kept to herself in silence. And when she had finished her tale, the small children who had been stolen away were sought out and brought to her side, and the wicked stepmother, who had so wrongly accused her, was banished from the land forever. Now it is said that the queen knew no sorrow until the end of her days, and that she lived in peace with her loved ones by her side, though part of the mystery remained with them always. For the youngest prince, whose starflower shirt had been incomplete, carried with him, in place of his left arm, a swan's white wing.